Hi everyone, I'm Paul Richmond and I am super excited to introduce you to someone who is very special to me. Her name is Linda Regula. She is an artist, a teacher, an author, a community advocate, and overall inspiring, awesome person. I started taking painting lessons from Linda when I was 3 years old, and they lasted all throughout my childhood. Linda has always been one of my biggest role models, inspirations, and heroes, and I think that you might feel the same way after you hear her story. She came out here to visit us in Monterey a few weeks ago to help out with our You Will Rise Project workshops that we were doing, which is our anti-bullying program. But while she was here, I really wanted to introduce her to the community and give her a chance to kind of tell her story. She has overcome so much adversity in her life and is somebody who uses art in a really inspiring way. So we set up an event at Open Ground Studios for Linda to share her story and her artwork, and we filmed it so that we could share it with you too here on my channel. Linda just released her autobiography. It's called Silver Bird in a Black Cadillac. And while she was out here, I had the honor of helping her put the cover together for that. So if you would like to hear even more about her story, you can go down below. I'll put the link to Amazon for ordering the book. And now I'm super excited to introduce all of you to my hero, Linda Regula.
There's 11 of us. We lived in a 3-room shack. No electricity, no running water, outdoor toilet. I know that sounds like really sad, but at that time, before the meanness and the badness started, I didn't understand that I was poor until I went to school. But anyway, a couple times a month, this car would come up, and it'd go very slowly, and a little girl would roll down the window, and she would wave at me. And I sat out there along the road a lot of times, and I always wished I was the people in those cars going away from this mountain, because by then my mom had left. My dad had become really mean. He was a pedophile. He was a very violent man. And so my life was pretty bad. And so anyway, this night, now I know it was a 1953 Fleetwood convertible would come by my house, and it would go, it'd come between the house and the road, and I'd be sitting up there. And the really unusual thing was, it would go so slow, I could see my reflection in the car. And we were not allowed to have mirrors in the house. My dad said it was vanity, that it corrupted women's minds. And so I went to a 1-room school, there was no mirrors. We had an outhouse, there was no mirrors. There was no mirrors in the house except one little mirror that my dad locked away, and he used it to shave. But we were not allowed to see it. As time went by, I forgot about this Cadillac. And about 2 years ago, I won a contest, and I went to Hyman, Kentucky. And I met this young man. His name was Robert Gipe, and he wrote this awesome book called Trampoline. And it's about the Appalachian a family. And so when I came back, well, I read the book in one setting. It was like from early in the morning till real late at night. And when I came home, I saw his name on Facebook. And at that time, I had fallen and broken my hip, so I had hip surgery. And so the campus was on a mountainside, and so I kind of drove my car around instead of walking from place to place. And so I said, could I be your friend on Facebook, and I love your book. And I said, you probably won't remember me. I'm the old lady that was gimping around all over the campus. And he come back on and he said, yeah, I remember you. You're the silver bird in the black Cadillac. And so I said, I got to write this autobiography. So my life was very colorless. It was a bad life, but I survived it. And I have never used it as justification to be mean to myself or to be mean to other people. I've used it to motivation, to do what I can to be a good person. Now this is me on this side as a kid, and this is my younger sister. This was me. I was in 3rd grade. I was real puny, and you can see the sad eyes. I didn't really have anything to make me happy. It was just a very, very hard life. We moved 9 times before I was 12 years old. This was my mother. She would run away. My dad would go get her, beat her up, bring her back, and then as soon as she got a chance, she would run away again. At that time, I didn't understand. I just saw it as she didn't want me. I was trash. And so a lot of my paintings, there are several series that I deal with that. This was me when I was in 7th grade. I was real skinny, and the kids were just terrible to me. These are some of the paintings I did that talked about the really barren life I had. We had coal oil lamps. We didn't have electricity. And I was always looking out the window because I always wanted to be somewhere else other than on the mountain. This was a painting called Reaching for the Light. When people went by our house, they saw the facade. But within that house, there was the red figure simulates the violence, the skeletal figure is the poverty, and the black and blue is the abuse. And you can see I'm reaching for the light. I want out of the mountains, but it's holding me back. Once my mom left, my dad married off my sisters, 13, 14 years old. Me and Annie and Carolyn were the only 3 left. Annie was always pregnant, so she had 5 children by the time she was 18 years old. I was expected to take care of the house. And this painting sort of symbolized it was a job too big for me, but I tried. This one is called The Changeling, and that's like Dad wanted me to take the place of my mother because I looked just like her. All his violence was usually directed toward me. This is called Into My Room, His Shadow Creeps. Most of the time when you see a house that I paint of my childhood, it's all broken apart. It has sharp nails or something because that was sort of a symbol. Now my father was also, he used religion to hide who he was. And people in the community called him Uncle John. And they didn't know that sometimes I'd come home, there'd be an 11, 12-year-old girl in his bed. And at that time, he was in his 70s. He passed away when I was 19 years old. He was 86 years old. After Mom left, and I couldn't go to school, I couldn't do the housework and everything, and our grandmother came to stay with us. She was an awesome little old lady. She was maybe a little over 4 feet tall. She had this long, beautiful gray hair, and she would braid it and wrap it around her head, and she smoked a corncob pipe. And so when the smoke would go up, it would just sort of circle her head, so we called her Granny Smoke. She gave me love, but right after, I think maybe it was 8 or 9 months, she passed away. She died unexpectedly. She had made me a doll, and after she passed away, I'd go up on the mountain, and I'd sit up there by myself with her doll, and that was comforted me. When we moved from the mountain down into what's called Lock 7, I had never seen electricity before. To me, it was magic because up on the mountain, we had coal oil lamps and there was no electricity, or we didn't have any. I'm sure there was people down around the town and everywhere that had it, but I can remember my dad, I asked him about these electric poles. Dad said, those are crosses, and if you're a bad girl, they'll crucify you like they did Jesus, so you better be good. And for weeks, I thought that's what they were. Until I met this girl named Joni, and she said, he's full of bullshit, don't you believe him? That one's called Shadows Must Be Taught Not to Follow. And if you see the shadows on the wall, the little girl being abused. But even though I left that environment, the shadow followed me. Because I thought, maybe it was my fault. And again, you see the house kind of broken apart with the nails and it was sort of downtime. I did some paint, but the thing of it is, it helped me work through it. That again is one of the broken ones. Again, me trying to run from the shadows. The broken chair is the violence. The empty table is the poverty and hunger. And of course, the penetration of the bed is the abuse. Now, even though I lived on this, my body lived on the right side of that canvas, my mind was over here. I imagined Princess Twilight. And she, long before the Twilight movies come out, I had a Princess Twilight. And she comforted me. She talked to me. And, you know, I was around other kids that were treated the same. And so many of them never came out of it. They ended up staying in the mountains, some killing themselves, some living with abusive husbands, some never marrying at all and becoming spinsters. She gave me the will to be something more. Like I said, we never had mirrors in our home. And I heard one day that this family had moved out of this house. There was still some furniture down there, and my cousin, she was also kind of raised the same way, not with the violence. We didn't have mirrors, and we didn't put makeup on, and we didn't do anything like that. But anyway, she said, there's a mirror down there. She said, we have to go down and let you look in the mirror. Because really the only thing I'd seen, the way I'd seen myself was in water puddles, on warped windows, in metal of a car. So I thought I was monstrous looking because, like some of those early pictures, my sister had taken them, but we never saw them. I only found them a few years ago. So I didn't even know that there was a photograph of me anywhere. So we go down there, and we're afraid that people will come back. So we get down on the floor, and we crawl across the floor, and I find this beautiful mirror, and I didn't understand that it was pointed up toward the ceiling. So when I reached out to touch it, I couldn't see myself. So my brother used to tell me stories of vampires. So I thought it was a vampire. I saw my father as a dragon. This is me inside the tree, and that's the little Princess Twilight out there with a golden sword that she's going to protect me from the dragon. From the time my sister took me, I had a good life. They treated me kindly. They taught me what love in a family is. I graduated from high school. I married a really kind man. We lived on a 144-acre farm. And one day I was putting in hay and with him up in a big hay mound, third floor hay mound, and I fell 40 feet out of the barn. And I was laid up. When that happened, they told me I'd never walk again. I shattered my pelvis, broke my back, shattered my ankle, broke my leg, and of course injured some internal things. But I gave up. After all this, and here I'm never going to walk again, I just sort of gave up. And I went to the, even when I came home from the hospital after 9 weeks, I had to stay in a hospital bed at home for another 3 months. And so I would go up to get therapy, and I figured, you know, I'm not going to walk again. I'm not going through this pain anymore. And this young man, my therapist was out for being pregnant, and it was his first day on the job. And I said, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do therapy. And he said, well, why? I said, because they said I'll never walk again. He said, oh, is that what they told you? And I said, well, yeah. He said, you got two good legs there, aren't you? And I said, yeah. He says, I want to show you something. I said, I'm not going to do therapy. And he wheels me in this room, and there's this little girl. She's walking on this runway thing in front of these big mirrors, and there's a nurse on one side, and she's just, every step is just, you can tell, tears running down her face, sweat. He said, she's walking out of here she's walking out of here in October, he said. And I said, well, you know, he said, let me tell you about her. He said she was late coming home from lunch at school, and she crawled under a freight train, and the freight train started and cut her legs off here. She's walking on artificial legs, and you're sitting there telling me you got good legs and you ain't gonna walk? Within about 4 months, I was walking. So, you know, I've had people all my life who have just been there when I needed them. And it's just like Paul says, I'm always there when he needs me, but I've had the same thing all my life. When I was in the hospital bed, a friend of mine said, Linda, you need to do something. You're going crazy. And I was. And she said, I'm going to teach you to paint. And I said, I'm not going to paint. Her and her husband and my husband built an easel over my hospital bed. I was in my living room, I was still in the pelvic traction, so I could only move my arms and my head about 12 degrees. And she put this easel up there, and then she attached a canvas to it. And I said, I'm not painting. And she said, yes, you are. And she squirted out purple paint, and she grabbed a brush, and she put it in my hand, and she took my hand and swapped it across that white canvas. And from that day on, I was hooked. And I've probably painted 600 or more paintings. I did a whole series. Each one means something. This one is called Leaving Me. Mom left a note that said, I'm going away. But all I got out of it was leaving me. So that's what this one's called. This one here in the center is called Prisons Are Not Always Made of Brick and Mortar. This one over there is called Night and the Shadows Dance. So that's what that one deals with. An abuser can tie a life up from childhood on if you let them. If you don't break the strings, they manipulate you. Once the physical thing stops, then if you let it stay up here, then it begins to manipulate you like puppets. So this is called the puppet master. A lot of the things I dealt with were issues that adversely affect women. This idea that you have to be a certain way, you have to look a certain way to belong, and so that's what that one deals with. This is the choice. You either go to the light or you go to the dark side. My grandma Smoke said, when God created the earth, he had some pieces left over, and he made sycamore trees. Well, I call them my patchwork trees, so I do paint a lot of patchwork trees. I stood out all the time with trees, and like I wanted to be a tree, I wanted to be part of a tree. So this is one where I'm standing there by the tree. The trees were living, and they were almost like they were human to me, and their branches, I would get up in their branches and they would hug me, and I've carried that love all my life. These are just some of the paintings that I've painted with the woods. We talked about me loving the woods. Now this is one that's kind of has some memories. My grandma Smoke said that's a wishing tree. And if you come out there in the dark and you be real quiet, fairies are in there, and if you make a wish, it'll come true. So this was the wishing tree, and I probably put thousands of wishes in there. So the purple iris is one of the first paintings Paul saw of mine when he walked in the room, and it's big, gigantic. So him and I sort of have this thing about irises, and every now and then he'll put an iris in one of his paintings to remind me. And I do abstract, and I do realistic, I do all kinds of medias. That's just chalk. This is my daughter and my granddaughter. I did portraits for a long time. About every 5 years I go through a whole different cycle of doing something different. I do abstracts, multimedia. That one's like with gold leaf. I got fascinated by junk. I call it junk or trash, because that's how I felt. I felt like my mom threw me away like trash. So I began to look in the environment for things that people had thrown away or discarded. And then I had nature, which was me, pretty them up. I'm a writer, and I usually find an issue that pisses me off, and then I set a love story against it and let them deal with the situation, and I get all my angst and anger out that way. And this deals with the mountaintop removal through the Appalachian Mountains. They've destroyed over 600 mountains, having to relocate hundreds of thousands of people, destroying the streams, building these big toxic holding ponds where they wash the coal. This one deals with human trafficking, and so many children are stolen away and they become prisoners. This has sort of always been my motto, is gather the colors of your life and go on. And that's what I've done. I did a series of nudes. When I was young, I felt very vulnerable, very closed in, and so I did several nudes that said how I felt during that period of time. Now, I just finished up, it's called Crossing Borders, and it's a series of work that I do with, there's 35 artists, and we're dealing with it's called Crossing Borders Project, and it's about how refugees, where did they go, who helps them, and what we did is, artists are they don't like people to mess with their paintings. This was the painting I did. It's called Run. See where I left it white up there? The next artist come in and painted part of her painting on that, and mine connected to hers. Then I went to the other side and connected mine to the other artist. And so we just started it as a little community project. It's going all over the United States. You want to see something that just takes your breath away, it's a video, a documentary, and it's longer, and it's called Breathe Free. And a lot of the stories that we told is on the video, and the actual people that trusted us enough to tell us their stories. This is my studio. I'm also a writer. I just published my 14th novel, and I'll be publishing my 15th one pretty soon. But this is my studio. And these are the books I've done. And of course, Paul did all my covers for me. The first 3 I wrote was about Princess Twilight. And those are geared toward children like 9 to 11 years old. And it talks about how to overcome bullying and you know, bad situations. And of course, this one is about my golden child. And that's a picture of him. And this one deals with the mountaintop removal, which I'm very passionate about. Now this tells the story of when I first went to live with my sister. In the actual story, Anna takes me and my sister. But in the real life, Dad wouldn't let her have Carolyn. She took me, and then I went back and got Carolyn, because I told him I'd go to the police if he didn't give her to me. And then I made sure she graduated and went on to school. Probably one of my favorite ones is that one. And I have several friends who have these terrible disabilities. One was born with spinal bifida, and she has a glass eye. She has brain cancer. She had her breast removed. I mean, she just, and she's been on crutches all her life, and yet this is the most marvelous person you'll ever meet. And then the other, when he had cancer, and he had his whole shoulder and side of his body removed, and he was an artist. And I always said if I had a magic wand, I would wave it and make them whole again in my head. I didn't tell them that. And so I got this idea for this story about this artist and also a white witch. She can paint these big paintings, and then she can sing people into them where they live their life whole. And when I got the idea, I thought, whoa, maybe that's not politically correct. And so I called both my friends, and I met them for coffee, and I talked to them, and I said, this is the idea I've got for my story. Is it okay? And they said, well, would you paint us a painting, you know? And then I dedicated it to both of them. So I get really upset about the wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. And this is the story of a young soldier who comes back, and he has PTSD. And my husband was in Vietnam, and when he came back from Vietnam, a lot of the soldiers went up into the mountains of Oregon and Washington, and they lived their lives up there as hermits. And so this is the story I wanted to tell of a modern day, and of course he goes to West Virginia, and he eventually finds his way in the world. Paul said, before I went out to meet the public, I always put on war paint. He could see it, but nobody else could see it. So when I moved to Zanesville, I became a community advocate. I was new to the town. I was there 2 years, and I convinced him to let me shut down the Y Bridge and hold an international art exhibit. Yeah. One of the biggest battles I fought was breast cancer. And one day I would have the radiation, and I would come home, and and my friends was, how are you? How are you doing? So what I decided to do is every day when I come home from radiation, I'd take my camera and I'd go out and I'd find something that made me happy. And one day I'm standing out on the porch. My daughter bought me that shirt, and I'm thinking, I'm a butterfly, and I stood out there and I took a picture of me as a butterfly. And unbeknownst to over in one area, there's a butterfly doing the same thing. Now, I did this every day. Paul did this drawing of me doing that. I did things that I always wanted to do. Now, the only two things I did not post on Facebook was dancing naked in the rain and jumping down the hot tub with the snow and making a snow angel. I did not post those two things. Here I'm painting a big vase. Our town of Zanesville was once known as the pottery capital of the world, and so we put these big vases throughout the town, and that was what I did for the bank. I saw this young man at an art show. His name was Nathan Cole. He had this unusual painting and had bad words on it. This figure has this green bile coming out of its mouth, and I mean, it was really a powerful, powerful painting to be in a high school student show. They introduced me to him, and I talked to him, and he said, well, I was bullied really bad when I was since I've been in school, because he was gay, and he said, I just had to get it out. He said, you know, they got a program in the school about bullying. And so I connected with it, and I said they were looking for an image to put on the posters, to put in all the schools in Muskingum County and Tuscarawas County. And so I painted this painting. This was a time when kids were killing themselves left and right. And so I painted this painting. It's called Sticks and Stones. I don't know if any of you know the old riddle, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Words do hurt. And so this was what I did. And I got a letter from this organization that said, this is too bold. We don't like the bad words in it. And we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So I'm like throwing this fit. I called Paul, and I said, do you believe this? And he said, we just need to do something. So that's how we started You Will Rise. And we allow kids to say what they want to say, to paint, to draw, to do what they want to do. This is one of the paintings I did with the words and how people can get in your head and hurt you. This one too is the same way. When I was in the 5th grade, I was really shy and bashful, and our teacher would turn on the radio once a week, and someone would tell a story, and then she would invite the kids to draw. Now, back then, we sat in rows, and you sat in alphabetical order. So all through grade school, the same kid sat behind me. His name, well, I won't tell you his name, but I called him Booger. I didn't call it to his face, but in my head he was Booger, because he would wipe snot in the back of my hair. He would spit in the back of my hair. We sat with the seats were kind of open here. He would get mud all over his shoes and rub them down my back. I mean, he would pull my hair. He would knock me down on the playground. He tormented me from he came in, I think, about the 3rd grade, and he sat behind me up through the 6th grade, because we didn't have middle school. You went, you know. But anyway, so I never would draw, because I didn't want anybody to make fun of me. And I thought if I drew something that was ugly, people would make fun of me. But this man was telling this story about a phoenix and how it rose from ashes. I drew a phoenix and colored it with crayons, and I was so proud of it. And the teacher, she always picked one, and it went in the place of honor for a whole week. She picked this drawing, and she hung it up, and she said, Linda, this is really beautiful. And I don't remember ever having a compliment up until that time. This was 5th grade. And the bell rang, and she walks out of the room, and Booger jumps up, runs up front, grabs the drawing, and tears it up, and throws it up in the air, and he says, you're too stupid to ever be an artist. And so that's why I didn't do artwork up until I fell out of the barn, because I just couldn't do it. That's why we chose it for the logo for our You Will Rise. There's me and Paul. And
now I have to tell you guys, I was not going to put any of this about me in this presentation today, because being the awesome teacher that she is, every time I'm with her, she is telling stories about me. And I said, Linda,
I
tonight,
got all kinds of
I said, tonight is about you. And this was the compromise. We had to save that all for the end. So now you can have your, like,
But
little...
see, the whole point of
Not that I don't like stories about myself, but...
the whole point of the thing, he has been such a big part of my life that if I didn't say things about him, you know, that's 34 years. I mean, that's a long time. He loves Snow White.
Now, this wasn't supposed to be a segue.
You started.
All right.
When he was a little boy, he loved Snow White. And for some reason, he started, I would open my door, and he would be standing there, and he would have an apple in his hand, and he would say, "This is for you, my pretty." And when he was about 5 years old. And I'd say, "Well, thank you." And then we would go up to the studio, and I would maybe hold it a while, and if I put it up, I knew he would not settle down and work. So what I would do is I'd take a bite of it, and then I would fall onto the floor. And then he was so young, what we would do, we laid on the floor and we draw. Then I'd spend maybe 20 minutes having him tell me a story, and I was always the damsel in distress, and he would save me. And then I'd say, well, do a drawing from that. And so we had such a way of doing it that I kept him moving from thing to thing. And that's probably the good thing with our You Will Rise thing. And you notice how we keep moving them around, because then you don't lose interest. So that's probably. But he did that up until he was, I don't know, till he fell in love with Dolly Parton. So that sort of ended the act. And his father would take him to the grocery store. And they would spend anywhere from 15 to 20, 25 minutes him finding me just that right apple. And it had to be a perfect apple. And he did that for years. And his dad was and mom were so supportive of him. And I always tell her, you know, she gave me the greatest gift because she let me be part of Paul's life. So, anybody have any questions?
Hi, I'm Bonnie Rose. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming out. One of the earlier paintings in the slideshow, I don't know if we go back in the slideshow, Paul, is that probably like from the beginning? I was just curious about medium and kind of your artistic process.
Oh,
too,
okay.
with, like color and, so I've been so fortunate to be able to paint with Paul as a teacher, and I see from your work, like, whoa, where he got it, and it's so inspiring, and so I'm kind of really loosening up of what I'm doing with my art. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
It's sort of brand new to just, you know, it's great to have him here bringing this.
And I think a lot of what I did is because my childhood was so gray and so colorless. If you've seen what we lived on, plank floors, you know, we would live in these houses. Like my father worked in it was called a coke factory. It was like he shoveled coke, and then he worked as a lumberman. And we stayed in these houses that most of them were built out of slab lumber. And they weren't wallpapered or painted. It was just the bare wood, and we would take newspapers and make a paste out of flour and water, and we would paste it over the cracks because the cold would come in. And we lived in a house with a wooden cook stove and one fireplace, and that was how we got our heat. But I think because my childhood was so colorless, then when I found color, man, I just go with it.
Did you ever see your mother after she left?
Yes. After she left, I became a detective, and we lived in Lock 7 at that time, and I heard from the grapevine that she was working in a motel in St. Albans, which was about 7 miles away. And the railroad went by our house, and it went up to St. Albans. And when I was 11 and my sister was 9, I decided I was going to go kill her. And I mean, you know, just crazy. I really wanted to see her, but I thought, you know, to motivate me, I'm going up there and kill her, you know. And so anyway, I go up, and we set out in front, and we walked the 7 miles up a railroad track. Dad had went to a big revival, and he was staying with our uncle or whatever. And 3 o'clock in the morning, we got up and we walked 7 miles up that railroad track. And we found the motel, and we sat behind this oak tree, and we would watch her, and she would come out, and she would be clean. She'd clean a room, she'd come out, and she'd shake her dust mop over the railing, and then she would go into another room. And I'm sitting there, and of course, as soon as I seen her, my heart just melted, you know. And so I knew we was going to really get a whipping for doing this. And so I told Carolyn, I said, let's go. And so we went back. But about 10 days to 2 weeks later, I couldn't get her off my mind. And so we decided to do it again. And so we went the 7 miles again. And we went, it was real early. We left, I don't know, maybe it was at midnight. And we walked through the dark at that railroad track. And we found, we went to the motel. And we were going, I just was going to walk in and say, I want to see her. Well, when we went in, she wasn't there. And he said, well, she doesn't come in until 9 o'clock. He said, she lives right up the road. And he told us what bus she rode, bus 13 and whatever. And he said, well, you can go up to that bus stop and you can meet her up there. And so we did, but we went the bus stop on past, because we wanted to be on the bus when she got on, because we thought when she seen us, she would love us and come home. And we were sitting in that back seat, and they stopped. Mom got on. She was so old looking, and she was real heavy. Now, Mom married my dad when she was not quite 17. She was pregnant with a child. My dad was 44 years old. His wife had just died falling down the steps, you know. But anyway, so she got up on, she come on the bus, and she had the same coat on she had when she had left us. And Carolyn jumped up and started down the aisle saying, Mommy, Mommy. And Mom just reached up, pulled the emergency cord, the bus stopped, and she got off the bus.
So did you have any formal training after you had your accident?
Yes, I went to Kent State University, and that was one of the reasons I got a divorce. My husband was, he was a farmer. The farm he was a 7th generation farmer. And I went, after I was in a wheelchair, after my accident, my husband said, Linda, is there something you wished you would have done? And I said, I wished I would have went to college, because we married right out of high school so I could get my sister to come and live with me. And he agreed. And I asked him, I wasn't going to marry him if he wouldn't let me do that. And he did. And so, but he expected me to be a PTA wife and, you know, the normal housewifey things. And when I started at Kent State, the professor saw something in my art, and he would put my work in shows, and I started winning prizes, and my picture was in the paper, and my husband didn't like that. He didn't set out to marry an artist. So I think we were about 18 years, and then we were divorced. But that was a lot of, but he was a kind man. He was a very kind man, but he just didn't want an artist, because, you know, most people think of an artist as a real crazy person that lives up in an attic and does drugs and all this stuff and beards and you know, and paint. You know, and they don't understand that the arts are so much more, and you know what it can give you. So he could not understand that. He just couldn't. It didn't register, and so I figured, you know, if I wanted to be an artist, I had to go.
She also opened several galleries,
yeah,
right?
I owned a gallery for 11 years in Worthington, and I sold the work of about 500 artists from international, national, and local.
She was the curator of a museum,
yeah.
and she's done a lot. It's hard to fit it all in, but
I was just a busybody.
Yeah.
I was always doing something. But the one really consistent thing in my life was my 2 children and Paul. And it's so funny. Paul was my golden child. Well, my daughter, she had this beautiful little granddaughter, and Sarah was just the joy of my life, and she knew Paul was my golden child. When Paul came out when she was about 12, and she said, Nana, now that Paul is your golden child, now that Paul is your rainbow child, can I be your golden child?
And I relinquished the title.
But he's still, in my eyes, he's still the golden child.
Because I happen to know that there are a lot of people in here who are good, awesome teachers and mentors in this community here. I just wondered if you had any advice about how to be a great teacher.
Well, I think the way I did it was I never wanted you to paint like me. I never wanted you to draw or paint like me. I wanted you to show the world your own vision. And so I was very careful about having him paint like me or paint what I wanted him to paint. It was always, you show me your vision.
See, I told you, wasn't she awesome? I realize now just how lucky I was to grow up with a Linda in my life. I wish everybody could have that same opportunity. And if you would like to learn a little bit more about our relationship and the way that her mentorship of me kind of led to the development of our anti-bullying project, there is a really awesome short documentary by Wild Iris Films called The Mentor and the Artist, and I will also put the link for that down below. Again, be sure to check out Linda's autobiography, Silverbird in a Black Cadillac, that's available now on Amazon. And thank you so much for hanging out with us, listening to Linda's story. I hope that it inspired you. Leave me some comments down below and let me know what you thought. And while you're down there, subscribe to my channel because I'd love to have you come back and hang out with me again. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.